In 1962, a border dispute between India and China erupted into full-scale war over boundaries drawn decades earlier by the British Empire. Nearly 60 years later, that unresolved geography turned lethal again. In the freezing dark of the Galwan Valley, soldiers fought hand-to-hand with rocks and clubs. 20 Indian soldiers were killed, and China took undisclosed casualties in the deadliest clash between the two countries in decades. Both governments immediately flooded the Himalayas with tens of thousands of reinforcements, carving new roads and bunkers into the mountainsides. These are two nuclear-armed giants boasting the largest standing armies on Earth, both actively competing for leadership across Asia and the global South. Given that mutual mistrust and recent bloodshed, military planners naturally ask why this friction hasn't spiraled into a conventional conflict. The explanation requires us to look past the troop deployments. The actual constraints preventing a shooting war are the economic and strategic chains quietly binding New Delhi and Beijing together. This bar chart compares bilateral trade volumes for the period of early 2025 into 2026. Look at the top bar. Trade between India and China reached $137 billion. That noticeably outpaces India's trade with the United States in the exact same window. That volume is moving despite India loudly banning dozens of Chinese apps and publicly promoting a strategy to de-risk its economy. While the trade numbers climbed, the militaries were pulling back. By late 2024, troops completed a structured disengagement in the Depsang and Demchok regions, dismantling temporary outposts. There were no victory parades. The pullback was negotiated through painstaking diplomatic talks because both governments quietly recognized the need to lower the temperature. 3 specific constraints dictate this behavior: supply chain dependency, vast strategic opportunity costs, and external geopolitical shocks. Peace along this border does not stem from diplomatic goodwill. It is a structural byproduct of deep, mutual vulnerability. India is rapidly attempting to build an advanced manufacturing sector, but it relies heavily on Chinese supply chains for substitution-resistant upstream inputs. Take the pharmaceutical industry. India manufactures a massive share of the world's generic medicines, but the required active chemical ingredients come overwhelmingly from China. The same dependency applies to advanced electronics and defense manufacturing, which require critical minerals and rare earth elements heavily processed by Chinese facilities. Because of these hard constraints, Indian policymakers practice what they term managed interdependency. They are selectively de-risking their economy, not fully decoupling. They place strict regulatory guardrails on sensitive digital sectors, while intentionally maintaining access to China's physical production networks to keep their own assembly lines running. China is equally constrained by its domestic economy, facing severe headwinds from a property sector crisis and massive industrial overcapacity. As Western markets raise tariff walls, Beijing has an urgent need to export goods. India, with its 1.4 billion people and a growing middle class, is one of the few consumer markets large enough to absorb that capacity. An actual shooting war would trigger immediate mutual export bans. That economic damage would instantly dwarf any theoretical value gained by capturing a few kilometers of high-altitude Himalayan ridge. This map displays China's primary strategic vectors. Beijing's military focus is overwhelmingly directed eastward, toward Taiwan and the South China Sea. The Himalayas represent a secondary theater. A prolonged conventional conflict here would force the People's Liberation Army to divert massive amounts of troops and resources away from the Pacific and route them into incredibly difficult, high-altitude terrain. Indian defense planners face an even steeper geographic problem. A full-scale war with China risks simultaneously opening a second active front with Pakistan to the west. Add in China's expanding financial and political inroads into Bangladesh, and New Delhi has to account for potential encirclement. Towering over these tactical problems is the presence of nuclear weapons. Both nations possess formidable arsenals and maintain slightly ambiguous no-first-use policies. Military leaders on both sides understand that any large-scale conventional war carries a non-zero risk of crossing the nuclear threshold. The compounding risks of fighting multi-front conflicts, combined with the danger of nuclear escalation, make conventional warfare mathematically unjustifiable for both governments. The 2024 and 2025 border disengagements did not solve the underlying disputes. They represent a strictly tactical rapprochement, forced largely by outside pressures. Chief among those pressures is the return of highly unpredictable trade and tariff policies from the United States. This external volatility creates a shared threat. Neither Beijing nor New Delhi wants to manage an escalating border war while simultaneously navigating major disruptions to their primary Western export markets. Look at this flow map of the global energy market. Amid instability in the Middle East, massive volumes of discounted Russian crude oil are being diverted simultaneously into both India and China. By early 2026, each country was securing roughly 1.6 million barrels per day. They are perfectly mirrored in their reliance on this specific energy source. They are geopolitical rivals competing for identical oil, yet operate as pragmatic partners in maintaining the complex supply chains required to process it. Shared vulnerabilities to volatile trade policies and fragile global energy markets act as heavy systemic stabilizers, forcing cooperation in spite of their mutual hostility. Tactical stabilization is entirely different from genuine geopolitical trust. Even as they trade goods, both armies are continuously pouring concrete, building permanent infrastructure, and hardening their defensive positions along the line of actual control. Deep symbolic frictions remain unresolved, particularly the looming geopolitical contest over the future reincarnation of the Dalai Lama and the status of Tibet. Resource competition is intensifying. China's massive dam construction on rivers that flow downward into India makes water security a persistent physical point of contention. Broader regional competition continues unabated. India is actively deepening military ties with the Philippines, while China strengthens its support for Pakistan. This diagram maps the actual architecture of their relationship: upstream dependency, two-front deterrence, and external shocks. When these three pressures converge, the strict mathematical result is tactical stabilization. The primary deterrent to a Himalayan war is no longer measured purely in artillery shells or troop counts. The true barrier to conflict is the inescapable web of 21st-century supply chains and global markets, linking two rivals who cannot afford to cut the very chains that bind them together.